If you spend enough time in the self-development space, you're going to start hearing about archetypes. Archetypes are maps we use to understand ourselves better. They're patterns that humans tend to fall into. And one of the most common archetypes you're going to hear about are the king, warrior, lover, and magician archetypes. Now, these are Jungian archetypes, and working with these archetypes, at least a little bit, learning about them at least a little bit, can be a really helpful self-reflection tool. Understanding the nature of these archetypes and the way that they develop can help you understand why you might be acting or reacting in a certain way. It can help you understand who's showing up to the table or to the conflict. Now today, I want to talk about maybe the most intuitive archetype for men, which is the archetype of the warrior, and why nice guys tend to misunderstand the warrior archetype. And if you're with someone who maybe overly identifies with this archetype or the less developed versions of it, maybe this can help you call them higher, call them into that more aligned and whole version of this part of them. And if you're like me and the whole concept of warriors or war is a bit off-putting to you, I promise this isn't about violence. What we're talking about when we talk about the warrior archetype is a protector energy. It is a disciplined, focused version of self. And as a guy who titled his podcast Reclaiming the Gentleman, I promise this is relevant. This is a necessary part of this whole process that this podcast is all about. This process of reclaiming the gentleman. It can't be done without understanding and integrating the warrior archetype. So stay with me. This is Reclaiming the Gentleman. I'm Dave Lashansky. So I have always been fascinated by World War II. Both of my grandfathers are veterans of World War II. Both of them signed up as teenagers to go fight in this, what is the biggest war that ever was. What is quite possibly the worst thing that ever happened in the history of the world. And I think I'm not alone in this fascination. And there's probably countless reasons why anyone would be interested in World War II, but one of the things that I think draws a lot of men to this level of fascination with it has to do with the hero narratives that emerged from it. In some ways, we like to cast anyone who signed up for that war, at least in the US, as a hero of some sort. We grew up learning about the heroes that sacrificed themselves, that were willing to put everything on the line for their country. Now, regardless of what you think about that, as a child, hearing about the value of doing this, the value of putting everything on the line, stirs something that is marrow deep, especially for a lot of boys. This idea of being a hero, of being seen as someone willing to nobly sacrifice in service of something bigger than themselves, is something most boys relate to innately. And it's so important that we understand this, because the warrior archetype begins as this heroic desire. Some maps will have you recognize the hero archetype as the immature version of the warrior archetype. Because when we think about the hero, when we think about that little boy who watches someone sacrifice so greatly and be revered for it, that little boy is imagining himself in that hero's shoes. It is a way most men love to be celebrated as heroic. We love the nobility of it. We love the idea that our hard work, that our bravery and our courage pays off, and to be recognized for that. It's a very, very special thing. And that's not to be underestimated. I think it's really easy to hear that and either minimize it or judge it. But if we just honor for a second the fact that that is so meaningful to a boy and, yes, to a man, we start to understand why a man might show up to a relationship the way that he does. Because before we develop a level of maturity around this narrative, when we are in an unconscious pattern, which is exactly what shows up in a conflict, when we're triggered, when we're stressed, when we're not resourced, this is what shows up. This little boy desiring recognition for his sacrifice. And now, these are huge generalizations, and this is one of the biggest flaws with talking in archetypes. But I think it's a really intuitive thing for a lot of guys. And if you're a woman listening and you're not quite following along, stay with me, because what we're going to do is connect this to the warrior, connect this to maybe the more integrated version of what this looks like in reality. Because it's not about going off to fight wars. It's not about putting everything on the line, but it is about the mentality that we show up to life with, that we show up to our relationships with. Now, one of the traps of this maybe unintegrated or incomplete hero archetype, what Jungian psychologists sometimes call the immature version of the warrior archetype, is that the hero is this kind of egocentric, and I don't mean it in a judgy way, but it is about the person who is the hero versus the warrior who is about the service, who is about the discipline, who is about the bigger cause, right? And this is so important, especially for nice guys or people pleasers. Because what we think we're doing as nice guys is being of service. What we think we're doing is some tiny version of this heroic act. Every time we do an act of service, every time we say yes, even if we want to say no, every time we make any kind of sacrifice, we want to cast ourselves in the light of the hero. And this is the part that is screaming to be recognized in everything that we do. We want to be recognized for our service, recognized for all the great things we do and what we sacrifice. We do it unconsciously for recognition. And if we are stuck in this people-pleasing pattern, this need to be the hero, no matter how much recognition we get, it will actually never be enough. And so, why do we talk about the warrior then? Because the man who has integrated the warrior archetype doesn't do it for the glory. The man who has integrated the warrior archetype understands that the service is not for him, but for the thing greater than him. The warrior's acts of service are acts of devotion for his relationship, for his family, for his community, whatever it might be. The warrior doesn't do it to be glorified. The warrior doesn't do it to be always remembered for how great he was. The warrior does it because he understands in his bones how important it is to him to be of service to the people and the community around him. And it's a really beautiful transition from what am I doing here to what is needed of me. The warrior doesn't make decisions because it will make him show up in a certain light. The warrior makes decisions because it is what he knows intuitively to be right, which means he has to be connected to his intuition. And this is why I actually really love this archetype. Because when I was first learning about these and I thought about the warrior, I didn't get it. And I was really stuck pretty constantly in this hero archetype, this need to be recognized and loved for how good and noble and of service I was. And no matter what I did, it was never enough. And I kept falling into these traps where when I was in conflict, this wound was always open and raw. Because I believed, how could you be mad at me if I'm doing all this stuff? Because I kept hearing this wound saying, you never recognize me. It always had proof of why it was good and was never willing to come to the table to be accountable for what it could do better. And so much of that had to do with the idea that my service was about me more than anything. And recognizing that, coming to terms with that, was some of the most gut-wrenching work I've ever done. It is humbling. This is why I think so many men shy away from doing this work, because that awareness, that self-knowledge is painful. But this is what's so fascinating about the warrior archetype. Because it is the version of you that is willing to endure pain for the higher good. Not to be recognized as a hero, but because it speaks to this innate desire to be of service and what it takes to actually do that. It speaks to how you can be in a flawed and often scary and sometimes dangerous world and not lose yourself in that, and not cower in that, and be a protector in that who makes decisions for what in his heart he knows is the higher good versus what he'll get recognition for or what's safe. Learning about what drives you, about how to really care selflessly without losing yourself, is the art of the warrior. It's one of the most beautiful arts of masculine energy and masculine dynamics in my mind. And yes, this is not just for men, obviously. I hope you understand that as I'm talking about this. But I do think learning about these maps is so helpful for men, especially because, as I've said, most men understand and feel these things viscerally, innately. You know, when I think about my grandfather's generation, I think about how all of these teenage boys, many of whom were probably sons of veterans of the last most horrible thing that ever happened on the planet, World War I, how they must have been thinking that this was their opportunity to prove themselves. How they must have been going into this horrible thing thinking this was their chance. And regardless of what they faced and what they endured there, those lessons need to be integrated by us. I really believe the way to honor their service is to learn the lesson. In my 21-day program, Reclaiming the Gentle Man, we talk about relationship conflict as the battlefield. And the reason I do this is because when we show up to those conflicts, if we're showing up with all of this hero energy, this need to prove and this need to be recognized, we're not going to have access to both hold ourselves and our own needs and honor those of our partners in the moment. It is a fine art to show up with warrior energy to your relationship. And you have to learn to do it outside of the conflicts. You have to learn to do it on your own in your men's groups, in your therapy, in your coaching. That's what it took for me. It took stepping outside of the relationship and into my own awareness of myself to actually engage this warrior part of me, this part of me that could be of service without keeping a tally, this part of me that was of service innately and naturally and could step up to the plate. And one of the things I want to mention before we close out, because this I think gets lost so often in men's work and self-development work, and especially archetypal work, is that these archetypes are energies. They are not fixed states. And when we are struggling, when we are not resourced, when we're caught off guard, it is totally normal and okay to move back into those older, maybe more immature, undeveloped archetypes, into that hero archetype. I certainly do this sometimes. Transcending the hero to become the warrior doesn't mean you will be perfect. It doesn't mean you'll always show up with that level of awareness and presence. What does happen is you know when you're off. This to me is the secret that no one really talks about when it comes to self-development. It's not that you become evolved. It's that you perceive when something's off, and you have the resources and the tools inside yourself to come back to that version of you want to be. And I want you to remember this if you're listening to this episode and really identifying with maybe the hero energy, or feeling really maybe disillusioned or disconnected from that warrior energy. Because it's not a constant state. But the act of seeing, the act of self-awareness and knowing yourself enough to recognize that's not my best. To have the resources to come back to your best in the moment, to recover yourself. That's the mastery. That's the warrior energy. It's not about pretending. It's not about performing a part. And I think this is the easy trap a lot of guys fall into, where we hear about an archetype and we start performing it. We start playing the warrior, playing the king, playing the mature boyfriend or spouse. All of this work is about presence. And presence is a state of self-awareness that fluctuates and ebbs and flows. And so maybe the practical piece in all of this is to consider, when I'm showing up to my relationships, to the duties in my life that are sacred to me, am I showing up to prove myself because I don't think I'm enough, or I don't think they think I'm enough yet? Or am I showing up with my warrior energy, who cares to face reality head on, who is able to find presence and discomfort because it is what is needed in the moment? The difference is profound. If you want more resources about these archetypes and working with this energy, I'm going to link 2 materials in the show notes. One is a podcast episode from a great podcaster who I really like, Lauren Kren. And another one is a book that gives a really detailed explanation of those 4 archetypes I mentioned at the beginning, the king, the warrior, magician, and lover, and how those develop. If you have questions about any of this stuff, if you want to talk about it, get in touch. I love hearing from people who are listening to these episodes. It's so cool now that Spotify Wrapped has come out. I've had a few people come up and tell me I was featured in it, and it's just such a cool thing. It does help me keep making these episodes, and if you're one of those people who's listening to this show and getting something out of it, one of the best ways you can help me is to leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. It helps other people find the show, and it helps me continue to make it and grow whatever audience is out there for this kind of work. And if that's you, I just so appreciate you leaning into it. I appreciate you giving me your time and attention and caring to do the work of self-development. And I have a special offer that's happening through the rest of December, where my 21-day program, Reclaiming the Gentle Man, which will start back up in 2026, is at a discount until the end of the year. And so if you want to start 2026 already having made a commitment to yourself to grow, to transform your conflicts so they're no longer devolving into disrespect and disillusion, and to access connection through your conflicts, to change the pitch and the trajectory of them so that when you feel it coming on, you feel resourced in approaching it and even excited to get to learn something about yourself or your partner. That's what's possible. If that sounds interesting to you, you can go to the link in the show notes and sign up now while it's on sale through the end of the year. I'm so excited for this next round of Reclaiming the Gentleman. And if this kind of work speaks to you, share it with a friend. Bring someone along with you on this ride. We are not meant to do this work alone, and that's why I love creating these groups. If you're looking for personalized, individual coaching on your journey of self-development, either for yourself, and this is not just limited to men, or as a couple, please get in touch. You can contact me at Dave_Lashansky on Instagram or via email at dave@davelashansky.com. Wishing you a beautiful day or night wherever this finds you. And thanks again for listening. I'll be back in a week.